Can you believe that a tiny metal can, often forgotten in the back of your kitchen cabinet and worth less than a cup of coffee, could hold the secret to longevity, vitality, and a heart that beats strong for decades? It's not a miracle drug. It's not a rare superfood imported from the ends of the earth. It's the humble sardine. Yes, this small, silvery fish, often misunderstood and dismissed for its bold aroma, is quietly earning praise from nutritionists around the globe as a treasure chest of nutrients from the sea. From clearing arteries and protecting your heart, to strengthening your bones and balancing blood sugar, all in one small fish no longer than your finger. If you've ever turned away from sardines because of what you thought you knew, maybe it's time to look again. Because the secret to living well, living long, and living fully might just begin with a single, simple can of sardines. For decades, sardines have been cast aside, labeled as old-fashioned, too fishy, too simple. Yet behind that modest tin lies one of nature's most complete nutritional packages, quietly waiting to be rediscovered. In today's video, we're diving beneath the surface, beyond the smell, beyond the stereotypes, to uncover the truth about sardines. Not just as food, but as medicine. You'll learn why this tiny fish, revered by the longest-living populations on Earth, is finally being recognized for what it truly is: a natural powerhouse for heart health, bone strength, and blood sugar balance. We'll walk through the science, we'll explore real stories, and most importantly, we'll show you practical, delicious ways to make sardines a regular and joyful part of your life. So whether you're a health enthusiast, someone searching for simple, lasting wellness, or just curious about what's been hiding in plain sight, you're in the right place. The truth about sardines is far richer than you've ever imagined. Let's begin. Let's start with what most people think they know: the smell, the texture, the idea of a fish inside a can. It's not glamorous, it's not trending on social media, and for many, it's an immediate no. But what if that scent, that fishiness we fear, is actually the scent of vitality? You see, that aroma isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It comes from the rich, delicate oils of omega-3 fatty acids, compounds so potent they've been shown to reduce inflammation, protect the brain, and unlock the gates to a healthier heart. What we've been conditioned to turn away from may in fact be the very signal of life-giving nourishment. There's also the modern myth that canned food is somehow lesser. That nutrition must come fresh, exotic, or expensive. But here's the truth: the can is not the enemy. It's a time capsule locking in nutrients at their peak, preserving calcium in the soft, edible bones, and keeping vitamins like D and B12 intact. Where else can you find such density of clean protein, healthy fats, and bioavailable minerals? In something that fits in the palm of your hand. And perhaps the most ironic misconception of all: that sardines are too cheap to be good. In a world where health is often sold in luxury packaging and high-end supplements, the sardine stands quietly defiant, humble, affordable, yet more nutritionally complete than many foods 10 times its price. A single can delivers more heart-protective omega-3s than a capsule of fish oil, more calcium than a glass of milk, more vitamin D than the morning sun on a cloudy day. It's not just food, it's a quiet revolution in a tin. The heart, that tireless drum beating beneath your ribs, doesn't ask for much. Just oxygen, movement, and the right fuel. And yet in the chaos of modern life, it is often the first to suffer. Clogged arteries, silent inflammation, and a lifetime of poor dietary choices slowly tighten their grip. But what if something as simple as a sardine could help set your heart free? Sardines are one of the richest natural sources of omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. The very compounds that medical science has long hailed for their cardiovascular benefits. These essential fats reduce triglycerides, lower blood pressure, decrease arterial plaque buildup, and calm chronic inflammation, the hidden fire that underlies many modern diseases. And unlike processed supplements, sardines deliver omega-3s in their whole form, paired with cofactors like vitamin B12, selenium, and coenzyme Q10, all working synergistically to protect the cardiovascular system. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American Heart Association found that regular consumption of fatty fish, including sardines, is associated with a 35% lower risk of dying from heart disease. Another study from Spain observed that individuals who ate sardines twice a week experienced significant improvements in HDL, good cholesterol, and arterial elasticity. But science only confirms what the world's healthiest cultures have long known. In coastal regions of Portugal, Sardinia, and Okinawa, places famed for longevity and low rates of cardiovascular disease, sardines are not exotic. They are a staple. Let me tell you about George and Evelyn Johnson, a retired couple in their 70s from coastal Maine. George had high triglycerides. Evelyn struggled with borderline hypertension. Medications helped, but not enough, and side effects made things worse. One day, their granddaughter, a nutrition student, suggested something simple: try sardines twice a week. George was skeptical. Evelyn wrinkled her nose. But they gave it a shot: lemon juice, cracked pepper, served on toast. And then, slowly but surely, things began to change. 3 months later, George's triglyceride levels dropped by 30 points. Evelyn's blood pressure evened out, but more than numbers, they noticed energy returning. Walks became longer, sleep came easier, and most of all, they felt in control again. Fish oil supplements are often touted as a convenient solution, but they're not always effective, prone to oxidation, often stripped of nutrients, and sometimes contaminated with heavy metals. Sardines, by contrast, are whole food purity, wild-caught, low in the food chain, meaning virtually mercury-free, and nutrient-dense without the processing. They're not just heart-healthy, they're heart-intelligent. When you open a can of sardines, you're not just opening lunch. You're unlocking a lineage of health that flows from the sea to your cells, nourishing the very rhythm of your life. Let the humble sardine be your ally, for your arteries, for your blood, for the quiet, loyal work of your heart. Our bones are more than scaffolding. They are memory keepers, strength holders, the silent pillars that carry us through life. Yet with time, stress, and nutritional neglect, they begin to whisper warnings: a crack, a twinge, a loss of balance. But what if something as unassuming as a sardine could help restore that quiet strength? Unlike chalky pills or fortified drinks, sardines provide calcium in its most natural, bioavailable form, from real bone. The soft, edible bones of sardines are not just safe to consume. They're designed by nature to be absorbed, carrying with them a matrix of collagen, phosphorus, and trace minerals essential for skeletal integrity. In just one can, you can get up to 35% of your daily calcium needs. No lactose, no artificial additives, no effort. Calcium without vitamin D is like bricks without mortar. Sardines are one of the very few foods on Earth that naturally contain both. While most people chase the sun for vitamin D or turn to synthetic supplements, sardines deliver this vital nutrient in a natural, balanced dose, just as the body prefers. And this matters because vitamin D helps transport calcium from your bloodstream into your bones, where it belongs. Without it, much of your intake is simply wasted. Studies have shown that diets rich in calcium and vitamin D significantly reduce the risk of fractures, osteoporosis, and falls. especially in postmenopausal women and the elderly. In Japan, where sardine consumption remains high, hip fracture rates in the aging population are dramatically lower than in Western nations. It's not coincidence. It's culture, one that nourishes the body with wisdom passed through generations. But sardines don't stop at calcium and vitamin D. They also deliver magnesium, which helps convert vitamin D into its active form. They contain phosphorus, which works alongside calcium in bone regeneration. And they're rich in protein, the raw material your body needs to rebuild tissue, maintain muscle, and protect joints. Together, these nutrients create a symphony of support, not just for your skeleton, but for the freedom to live, move, and age with grace. Imagine climbing stairs without hesitation, lifting grocery bags without strain, or simply waking up without that dull ache in your hips. That's not fantasy. That's physiology. When bones are nourished, the body responds. So the next time you open a can of sardines, know this. You're not just feeding hunger. You're feeding resilience. You're reinforcing the very frame that holds you. Our blood sugar, like the tide, ebbs and flows throughout the day. But when those tides become storms, crashing too high or receding too low, our bodies begin to suffer in silence. Fatigue, weight gain, insulin resistance. These are not just symptoms, they are signals, and few foods can restore balance quite like the humble sardine. Sardines offer a near-perfect nutritional triad: high-quality protein, healthy fats, and virtually zero carbohydrates. This combination slows digestion, eases the release of glucose into the bloodstream, and keeps insulin, the hormone that governs blood sugar, in check. Unlike sugary snacks or even starchy meals, sardines don't cause a spike followed by a crash. They offer something rare in modern diets: metabolic steadiness. That means fewer energy dips, less brain fog, and a body that runs on calm, clean fuel. A 2021 clinical study from the University of Barcelona tracked patients with prediabetes who added sardines to their diet 3 times per week. After just 12 weeks, over 30% of those patients moved out of the high-risk category. Their insulin sensitivity improved, inflammatory markers dropped, and cravings, those nagging saboteurs of progress, began to fade. The researchers weren't surprised. They knew that sardines, with their omega-3s, taurine, and complete amino acid profile, do more than feed. They regulate, repair, and restore. Every time you eat a sardine, you're making a promise to your pancreas: I won't overwhelm you today. You're choosing a food that doesn't require insulin chaos, that doesn't burden your liver, and that feeds your cells without fear. For anyone managing diabetes, battling cravings, or simply looking to stabilize mood and energy, sardines are more than a meal. They are metabolic medicine, sealed in silver. When blood sugar is balanced, life changes. You sleep better. You think clearer. You stop chasing the next meal because your body finally feels full, not just with calories, but with real, sustaining nutrition. That kind of peace doesn't come from processed foods or quick fixes. It comes from consistency, from simplicity, and often from a fish that once seemed too humble to matter. Nutrition is not about isolated compounds. It is about harmony, the way one nutrient empowers another, the way food speaks to your cells in a language that pills often cannot. Sardines, in their unassuming simplicity, are the embodiment of that harmony. Every beat of your heart is powered by mitochondria, the tiny energy factories in your cells. Coenzyme Q10, CoQ10, is the spark they need to function. And sardines, they are one of the richest, natural sources of this vital compound. As we age, our levels of CoQ10 decline. That decline has been linked to heart failure, fatigue, and even cognitive impairment. Supplement companies sell it in capsules, but nature tucked it into every bite of sardine, right where it belongs. Selenium may be a trace mineral, but its role is anything but small. It's an antioxidant defender, a DNA protector, and a key player in thyroid health. Sardines, by the grace of the sea, provide a concentrated dose, enough to support your immune system and keep oxidative stress in check. What's more, selenium and CoQ10 have been shown to work in tandem, improving heart function and reducing mortality in elderly patients, according to a landmark Swedish study. DHA, one of the primary omega-3s in sardines, is not just good for the brain, it is the brain. Your gray matter, your memory, your ability to think and feel and remember, all rely on DHA. In a world where mental fog, anxiety, and early cognitive decline are growing concerns, sardines offer clarity, not metaphorically, but neurologically. It's not just the presence of these nutrients, it's how they cooperate. Sardines deliver iron and vitamin B12 together, aiding in red blood cell formation and energy metabolism. They offer protein alongside phosphorus, vital for muscle repair and bone regeneration. Magnesium calms the nerves, while vitamin D uplifts the immune system. No supplement can replicate this dance. This intricate, intelligent design of nutrients moving together through the bloodstream, each amplifying the other's effect. In today's world, we are overfed but undernourished. We consume too many empty calories and too few life-giving molecules. Sardines reverse that equation. They deliver more of what your body truly needs in less space, with less cost, and with zero pretense. So the next time you hesitate thinking a small fish cannot possibly hold great power, remember this. Your body does not crave extravagance. It craves intelligence. And sardines are brilliant. Time is the greatest test of all, and the body remembers everything. Every processed meal, every skipped nutrient, every spike of sugar or silent inflammation. It adds up, but so do the good things. The choices we make in quiet kitchens, in small routines, in humble meals, they matter. And sardines, more than most foods, prove this truth beautifully. With regular consumption, the omega-3s in sardines don't just make a difference, they make a legacy. They help keep arteries supple, reduce blood clot risk, and protect against the slow buildup of plaque that leads to heart attacks and strokes. In regions where sardines are a dietary staple, from the Greek Isles to coastal Japan, rates of cardiovascular disease are markedly lower. These aren't trends. They're patterns. Patterns formed by consistency, by tradition, by respect for what the sea provides. As the years pass, bones become quieter until they don't. A single fall can change a life. But with the regular intake of calcium, vitamin D, phosphorus, and protein, all found abundantly in sardines, bones stay dense, resilient, and ready. For aging adults, sardines offer a quiet kind of strength. Not just bone health, but independence. The ability to walk, to stand tall, to dance without fear, it all begins on the plate. The blood sugar stabilizing effect of sardines builds over time. With consistent intake, the risk of developing insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes declines significantly. Prevention is powerful, but it rarely feels urgent. Sardines make prevention simple. They turn it into a habit so small, so sustainable, that its effects feel almost effortless, until you look back years later and realize how much they've done. There are countless stories, not of overnight miracles, but of gradual healing. Of a man in his 50s who swapped his daily sandwich for sardines and saw his blood pressure drop. Of a grandmother who added sardines to her rice twice a week and noticed her joints ache less, her steps grow steadier. These stories don't make headlines, but they change lives. Where else can you find a superfood that costs less than a cup of coffee, needs no refrigeration, and lasts for years in your pantry? Sardines outshine most modern health supplements in both effectiveness and affordability. In an age where wellness is often marketed as luxury, sardines are a quiet rebellion, proof that true nourishment is neither expensive nor complicated. What you eat today shapes the life you'll live tomorrow. And if that choice includes sardines, even just once or twice a week, you are making an investment, not just in your health but in your future, in the energy to play with your children, in the stability to walk without pain, in the clarity to remember every story you've lived. The humble sardine does not promise miracles. It delivers something greater: consistency, protection, and quiet strength, one can at a time. Now you know the truth. That tucked inside an ordinary tin, quietly waiting on grocery store shelves, lies one of the most complete, affordable, and powerful health foods on earth. The sardine, not glamorous, not trendy, but time-tested, backed by science, and embraced by generations who have lived long, vibrant lives. We've seen how sardines support your heart, not just in the moment, but across years. How they strengthen bones not just to stand, but to move freely. And how they bring balance to blood sugar, calming the storm that modern diets so often create. You don't need to change your whole life to live better. You only need to begin with one small, quiet choice. Maybe it's a can of sardines in your lunch bag. Maybe it's trying that new recipe you saw in this video. Or maybe it's simply seeing this humble fish with new eyes. If this video gave you a new perspective, if it sparked curiosity, or even changed your mind, give it a thumbs up to let us know. Have a favorite way to eat sardines? Share it in the comments. Your tip might inspire someone else to begin their journey to better health. And if you're ready for more truth-driven, deeply nourishing content, subscribe to this channel. Because real health isn't complicated, it's consistent. And we're here to walk that path with you. Start small, start today, and let the simplest food become your strongest ally.